Can you hear me all right now? Sorry.
I hear you great. I'm a
Okay.
few Bellinis deep this morning, so if I mishear you, it's 100% on me.
Well, we're just going to start with that, I guess. So yeah, I feel like we've kind of been holding our tongues on this one. And, I guess it's time to shed some subscribers here because I just have to tell people honestly, like, I don't know what Harry's doing with this title. So this week, the title of his book was released, and the title he's going with is Spare. And to me, the fact that he's choosing as the title of his memoir and sort of the metaphorical seal on his whole life story, he chooses to use this term that is a pejorative term, and it is the central grievance of his life, that he's like this also ran, and that he's second in his life. And to me, it just smacks of more whining. And I understand people say, well, that's the role he's been consigned to in life. Well, that's not the only role. And I think that he has this grievance that he feels like he's trapped. He can't do anything else but be this spare. And I think that's his problem. I think that's his misunderstanding. And I think that it's really, really immature and unseemly of him to make that the title of his autobiography. It just seems to me like he's just completely stuck on this sense of grievance and victimization, and that is the filter through which now everyone is going to see his life. He wants everyone to see his life. I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah. Well, I definitely understand that perspective. And I think there's a lot going on with it. On the one hand, I have voiced similar things to what Harry himself has voiced, and that's this idea that, like, if you're privileged and well off in society, there's kind of this view now that you're not entitled to have any problems. It's like you need to be just so, I don't know, grateful for your good fortune, that no matter what kinds of bad things befall you, you don't have any entitlement to pain, suffering, compassion. Mm-hmm. So I do understand and appreciate that. I also kind of appreciate that there is something bigger that is going on with Harry's life than just his life. I mean, this is kind of going to the viability of the monarchy as an institution as a whole. This is a very archaic system. It dates back to 1066. I mean, we don't really do things the same way as we used to. And I do think there are valid criticisms of a hereditary type of system where you're born into it, you don't have any choice. And I think the challenge with Harry is that we see the potential that he had and the promise that type of birthright offered him. I mean, just so much opportunity that he could have used for something greater than, unfortunately, from my perspective, what he's chosen to use it for. And so that really, to me, makes him much more of a tragic figure. I don't know about you, so I'll ask. I grew up watching the royal family. I mean, I remember where I was when I found out that Princess Diana died. I was moving back into my dorm room for my sophomore year of college. I've been aware of, William and Harry since basically they were born. I'm not that much older than them. So I have a sense of how, to Harry, I can see how growing up in the public eye and getting the kind of scrutiny that he's gotten, I mean, that is a very difficult burden for anybody. And so for him, where it's kind of like, well, and it doesn't even really matter, because you're not that important, I can see how that would maybe seem to be kind of a waste. But it's just unfortunate because, like I said, it is kind of this invitation to greatness that he had available to him, and so far just seems to not be accepting that invitation.
Well, that's interesting. And I am glad that you brought up the idea that just because someone is in a wealthy situation or a socially privileged situation, that doesn't mean that they don't have problems. And in fact, you can have way more psychological issues and you can have way more trauma growing up in a wealthy home than if you're in a healthier home that's, working class or even in poverty, right? But and so I'm not trying to promote the idea that, you know, he shouldn't be unhappy, or that losing his mother was not hard, or that having his role in the royal family is not hard. I just think, is it harder than what a lot of us have gone through in our lives? I mean, and there are a lot of people who I think have been through as bad or worse than Harry, who are not going around with this constant sense that that they're victims, and that they're oppressed by life, and that they're oppressed by, you know, basically all the institutions and people around them. And I don't know, I was a lot more middle of the road on this until that Oprah interview. And to me, and I know it's for you as well, that Oprah interview, it was so ridiculous. And it really lowered my estimation of Harry and Meghan a lot, because there were just so many lies and misrepresentations in that interview. That interview was a really stupid idea.
Mm-hmm.
And so to continue to perpetuate that impression that they set up in that interview, now they're perpetuating it in this memoir. And it's the same old grievances, the same old, you know, victim story. And I just think that, you know, it's one thing to work through your problems and to have therapy and all of that and to be self-aware. That's great. But the next step after self-awareness should be some kind of self-actualization. And I feel like Harry is running the opposite direction, into a kind of an immaturity. And I know that Meghan Markle is helping to facilitate that. And I'm quite sure that from the moment that Meghan met Harry, Harry has been filling her mind with all of these bad things about the royal family and about how awful it is to be the spare and all of that. And so I don't actually blame Meghan for everything. I think this is two flawed people who are now feeding off of each other's pathologies publicly.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of hard to argue with that, just based on, you know, how we've seen the things unfold. Being a royal watcher, I of course followed the wedding and all of the lead up to it, and I, you know, read U.S. press, I read European press, I read UK press. So I don't feel like I got particularly shoehorned into one particular style of coverage of this story. And my impression was always, it was just overwhelmingly welcoming to Meghan Markle. People were thrilled to have a woman of color joining the British royal family. It was like the coolest thing that they had done in ages. Harry has always been super popular, despite his, you know, many very public stumbles. There's been a lot of stuff out there that suggests maybe there are reasons to not be so keen on Harry, but he's always come across as you know, the cheeky chappy, you know, fun kind of frat boy kind of guy. He obviously did his military service, and that, I think, the part that is just a little bit hard to reconcile. Okay, he says now that he has always been unhappy in the royal family, always wanted out. But there was definitely quite a run there where he seemed to really be thriving within that structure. He had finished his military career, so he retired from the military as Captain Wales, and went on, did the Invictus Games, started all that up. He was, you know, doing work with Bali in Africa. He was doing work with Well Child, with all these different the military patronages that he had and stuff, and
doing more with his life than I have with mine up to this point.
Yeah. And so, like, when you talk about things like the self-actualization, I mean, again, this is really pointing to the opportunities that Harry had by virtue of his position that none of us are going to have. We don't get to pursue our passion projects, and, you know, because we have to put food on the table. So, you know, when it comes to running a charity for HIV orphans in Africa versus, you know, my day-to-day drudgery of the 9 to 5, most of us don't get to make that choice. And so he really did, and he did, you know, tours in the Commonwealth. Obviously was very popular. Made a great hit. Was doing the mental health work with William and Catherine. So it's hard to look at this timeline and not see, you know, the arrival of Meghan Markle and, you know, whatever objectives she brought to that relationship as a massive turning point maybe if not exactly in Harry's perspective, at least with his ability to cope and to function in a healthy way, within that framework that he was born into.
Right, right. And I just want to reiterate something that you were alluding to earlier when you said that Meghan Markle received a warm welcome. That is what I remember as well. And I myself was very impressed with her initially. I was like, wow, very attractive, very well spoken. She seems very like an independent, fresh type. But yes, there were some stories in the press where there were some things said that were a little bit off. Yeah, there was a remark made about Compton because she lived in Compton for a while, yes, and stuff like that. I understand that people don't like the overtones, but look, the media writes all kinds of stuff, and the vast majority of stories on her in the British press and the American press were very positive until she and Harry started doing some asshole stuff. And you had you had them lecturing the public about climate change and all that, and then taking their jets here and there, and like people don't like that. And I think that one thing I wanted to bring up, and here we're going to get into some trouble, but I think there's a definite misperception about Princess Diana, and I think that understandably people have idealized her since her death. But I think there's some hard truths about Princess Diana we need to cover here. Did you want to start off?
Let me jump on that grenade. Well, no, I think of course you're right. And I mean, this goes for Harry too. It goes for anybody in the public eye. One of the things that's kind of been fascinating for me as a normal person who suddenly has a lot of people watching what I say on YouTube and Twitter and stuff for no apparently good reason, is that it's amazing how people really will project their own hopes and ideals and things like that onto you. Like, whether you are those things or not, there's just this kind of expectation and understanding that you are. And that's really, turned up to 11 with Princess Diana. But yes, as a follower of the royal family, I have read just about every one of the, canonical books about her. I've read Tina Brown's book. I've read Andrew Morton's book. And yes, I've read Lady Colin Campbell's book. And I've watched her interviews. And yes, Diana was a very difficult person. I think the hard thing to remember,
yes,
she was a product of severe childhood abuse. And I say this, of course, not in any way to degrade her or anything like that, but that can just be a very difficult burden to have to overcome in a person's life. And so, yeah, she developed into somebody who was relatively neurotic, had, a pretty hard time with relationships, pretty chaotic type of way of handling interpersonal situations, which is normal for somebody, who's a product of that type of environment.
Right. And here I'm going to go even a bit of a step further, and I can just see some of people rolling their eyes before this even comes out of my mouth. But I do think there were some borderline tendencies there too. And I know people are like, you think everyone's borderline? Well, no, I just tend to focus my program on people with a particular set of issues. No, but seriously, I mean, there have even, and I'm not saying that all the stories that come out about her are true, but there are some reputable stories that have come out that she was treated for borderline personality disorder by a psychiatrist at one point. If you look at her relationship patterns, I'm talking about the men that she dated other than Prince Charles, you see a lot of problems with emotional regulation, dysregulation. And I know people say, well, she was in an unhappy marriage. Okay, but she was half of that. And really what happened was, she dramatically misrepresented. I know Charles misrepresented things with Camilla, that he didn't tell Diana, well, I've got this woman that I'm still really attached to. Although he did introduce them actually, and they were hanging out a lot. But Diana wanted to land a prince. She wanted to be the Princess of Wales. And I understand she was young. I understand she was in her, her late teens or whatever. But she misrepresented who she was to Charles, and she made herself, seem like something that someone who was into his interest, into intellectual stuff and reading and all of his stuff.
The
country, gardening, all of that. And look, I know that we all, when we're first dating someone, we pretend to be things that we're not to a degree, but she faked a whole facade. And I know she was young, and I know we do stupid things when we're young, but she was part of the problem. And Charles did try to make that relationship work for a while. He and Camilla were not having an affair in the early years of his marriage to Diana. And Diana would throw tantrums constantly, and that she was highly emotionally unstable. And then of course we know there was the eating disorder and all that, which I'm just saying there's a whole picture here that people don't want to get. Mm-hmm. And what I'm also saying is that whatever problems Prince Harry has psychologically, I don't think that they're just Charles's fault, or they're just the royal family, or they're just the media. And, you can speak to this in a moment about Princess Diana's parenting of Harry. But I remember reading that she did some terrible things to her sons. For instance, her sons got very attached to a particular nanny. I'm not talking about Tiggy, I'm talking about a different one, but a particular nanny. And Diana was threatened, and so she fired the nanny, and it traumatized those boys. I've also read stories about her shutting herself into the bathroom and crying and wailing, and the boys sitting outside, Mommy, what can we do for you, and all that. I mean, you don't think that has an effect?